1919, when a new editor, L.R. Lizelle, tells the serious sickness of former editor Roy P. Allison, and states that the newspaper is now back in its position to greet the Herald reader. By December 26th, the flu situation is so much improved in Valley City that scarcely anything is heard of it anymore. This is mighty good news, and the people will be glad to know that it is dying out. Checking further into 1919, there are a few more sick in Valley City, but it's pretty sporadic. The other newspapers reported sickness and death well into 1919. Wimbledon reported some even into 1920. Litchfield School was closed until January 1919, having been closed 12 weeks. An unresearched consequence of this flu may have been insanity amongst the parents. In the end, Fargo, with a population of, I think Fargo at that time was about maybe 12,000, had a total of 2,000 reported cases and 170 deaths. Further breakdowns of effects throughout the state come in the 1920 State Board of Health biennial report. The influenza still does not appear in the individual category, but instead under other infectious diseases. Barnes County suffered 1,500 cases and 70 deaths. This is to be compared with Stutzman's 6,000 cases and 150 deaths. Cass County had 3,000 sick and 150 dead. And beyond that, I was unable to obtain any further breakdown of these numbers into city or township. They were recorded, but have since been lost. In total, North Dakota had 34,000 reported cases and 2,600 deaths. The pages of these newspapers are filled with stories of human tragedy and spirit to survive. There are many heroes who tried to do their best in a terrible situation. The many doctors and nurses who served bravely to take care of the ailing often go unmentioned. The death of James Nelson, the oldest son of Mr. and Mrs. Henry Nelson, who lived north of Daisy, is reported in the November 8th Daisy Commercial Citizen. It states, "The entire family had been sick, and Jimmy remained up doing the work and taking care of the rest. He did not seem to realize his own serious condition in the efforts to save the others. When at last he could keep up no longer and was forced to go to bed, it was found that pneumonia had a deadly hold on him and the case was hopeless. He died at home Tuesday evening and a short funeral service was conducted Thursday." The Times Record reports that the Finney family of Valley City were again happy December 13th because their mother was over the flu and was so than. T-H-A-N, than. The big brother that so nobly presided over the culinary department doubly rejoices over mother's improved health, as well as that of his brother. I don't believe they panicked in 1918, at least here. I suppose in the rest of the world where it was probably more severe, there might have been a bit more strain going on, but here at least they seem to have remained calm. Some might say the Times Record took a rather cavalier attitude in its language. It's safe to say it had a rollicking sense of humor, which I imagine would be probably difficult to maintain under such conditions, but I feel it also kept the populace from panicking. What happened after 1918? Well, scientists were unsuccessful in identifying what the 1918 flu was. It made them scratch their head for many, many years. Would it come back? When would it come back? How many would it kill this time? Progress was made in the 1930s with the discovery of the invention of the scanning electron microscope. It was then that we caught the first glimpse of the culprit, virus. And after that, we began to unravel and classify the basic origins, mechanics of how the influenza virus worked and how it mutated species to species. We discovered ferrets were susceptible to human flu virus. And this is probably a remarkable thing to say is, well, okay, swine can get it, ferrets can get it. We discovered this because a scientist sneezed on a lab ferret. The ferret got the disease from him. So with that, they had an experimental subject to place it on. They could grow the virus. They grew this virus in flu culture in live chicken eggs. And from this, they made a vaccination to inoculate the population. They set up a worldwide system of monitoring the flu and reporting emerging strains and preparing for next year. They tried to get enough serum made up to figure out, okay, this is how much people are going to suffer from this disease. They made up serum for it. It doesn't always go well, but for the most part, they've been pretty well spot on for the past 70 years. A few dedicated scientists continue this process. Unfortunately, it's very much dependent upon political and social climates. Ebola, AIDS, anthrax have lots of flashier news coverage, but they're relatively preventable. How does one stop from breathing? You know, the flu is an aerosol, so how do you stop from breathing? You can't. Otherwise, it's probably a little more permanent than you were thinking. Anyway, so what happened again in 1997? Few realize that a major bullet was dodged in 1997. A virus had developed amongst the chickens in Hong Kong's open-air markets. Chicken Ebola was its name given to it, and it killed the chickens in probably a matter of minutes. The chicken virus spread directly to humans without a swine middleman. This is extraordinary. Rarely, I mean never before, has a virus gone from the bird to humans. How can it do this? There's no cure and no serum for bird influenza. You know, if this thing had broken loose, we'd have been in major, major trouble. The virus kills the eggs used to make the serum, so there's no possibility of making a serum. And the only way it was avoided was by early detection, swift measures to eradicate all the infected birds, as well as change forever how they were handled. The only way we got lucky with this disease, or this virus this time, was it was confinable. It had not mastered the ability to be transmitted through the air. It was still needing transmission through direct contact between humans and infected chicken feces. If it had developed this last final step, educated people believed that it would have circled the globe in a matter of hours, not months, and it would have killed over half the population of Earth. So, 1918 flu has made recent news. Genetic mapping of samples known of 1918 victims has begun. It's taken two paths. There's autopsy samples from military pathology lab in Bethesda, Maryland. It's little wax cubes of embalmed tissue. Samples from all the autopsies, ever since 1863, are stored in a warehouse in Maryland. And so from in there, they looked up 1918, seen who died of the flu, who had it within the first 3 days. After that, flu kind of turned into pneumonia, so anything after that, flu would have been gone. And they looked into it, and they found the genetic markers of the 1918 flu. The other direction was to go into the land of the permafrost and find corpses that died in 1918 from the flu, and hopefully they've been frozen ever since then. They dig them up, they remove a few necessary pieces from the lung, bring them home, and they too have been found genetic materials from the 1918 flu. There's been success in recovering these samples, identifying the flu genes, and identifying each other as the culprit. Mapping of these findings has begun, and at last we may possibly discover the murder of 1918. Sadly, living memory of the 1918 flu is fading into history. I advertised for local people to bring me their flu memories and stories. Today, there are fewer and fewer eyewitnesses to the events of 1918. Those remaining today were children. They saw things through the eyes of a child, and perhaps were not fully aware of what was going on around them. Many survivors of the 1918 epidemic say that flu was just something not talked about. Something remembered by the children of 1918 is the jump rope rhyme, "Had a little bird, his name was Enza. Opened the window and influenza." So, children at this time I've talked to. Charlotte Van Houten is the daughter of Dr. Van Houten. She had the flu with such a high fever that all of her hair fell out, and she wasn't expected to live. Her father put her in a private room in the general hospital with a personal nurse not allowed to leave the room. Thankfully, Charlotte lived to tell about it. For months afterwards, she remembers that her mother rubbing oil in her head to stimulate hair growth. Harriet Halverson brought in the information that her father, John Halverson, died of the flu just a few months after she was born, as did her uncle Halver Halverson, Jr., and two cousins that died a day apart in Svea Township. All of this within a week's time. Her sister Alice was also sick, but she lived. We have the story of Gus and Hilda Vanas of Litchville. Hilda nursed their 8 children by day, and Gus took over by night, putting on mustard plasters on the children, hovering over them at night, and laughing softly when the fever broke. Joanne Matson's grandparents, Andrew and Johanna Malum, lived in Hastings during the time of the Great Flu epidemic. Her grandma Malum and Reverend Lassens went around Hastings ministering to the flu families. Grandma Malum would help wherever she could, washing clothes, cooking, or bringing meals to the victims. She herself never became a flu victim. Reverend Lassen and 2 of his daughters went around giving words of comfort and rubbing the backs to make the sick more comfortable. Many people died, including Ingo Lassen, who was the teenage son of the pastor. Ole Reiten and his wife were sick and had to close up his hardware store and go home to bed. Their 2 children both were sent to stay with the Malums. They all survived, but their daughter Julian said that when Reverend Lassen came to see them, she pretended to be asleep. She credits this with her not getting the flu. Albert Flash from Bismarck sent me word of his mother, Mrs. John Flash, who from a risk had died, leaving 6 children. Anne Ravling, I don't think she's here tonight, she brought in a series of letters written to her grandfather and father, Andrew, to her Uncle John in October and November of 1918. The first letter of October 24th tells the happy news of the birth of twins, Anne and her brother. It also mentions the prevalence of flu in the Rolla Devils Lake area. On the 30th of October, the letter is telling that her mother, Anna, had developed pneumonia in the hospital with a fever of 103. The letter of the 1st says several people in the area had flu and a few had died. Finally, there's the sad letter of the 6th, confirming that they got the flowers John sent for Anna's funeral. Sanford Tigley from Nome called this afternoon wanting to make sure that I mentioned the Nome doctor, Dr. Silas Nessie, who worked day and night helping people with the flu by having people drive him in a sleigh home to home while he slept on the way there, each way. He worked night and day, needed to sleep, people drove him there, and that's how he got his rest. Hey, not doing too bad on time. Our oral history project, something we're extremely proud of here. We broached the topic of flu with a few of our interviewees, and I'd like to share a few with you, if I might, and then we'll conclude with questions. So with that, I'll turn off my light, turn on the VCR.
We got the flu there today. And he had the flu, and he was so bad they sent him to New Hampshire, to a hospital in New Hampshire. And he got so thin that when his dad went to see him, he could see up to his hand.
Wonderful little lady lives in Valley City here over by the little dam.
So he was a pretty sick boy.
He was out on the East Coast somewhere.
Yeah.
She's talking about her
New
husband.
Hampshire he was in. And they sent him there from Fargo, I think.
Do you remember him going?
No, I don't remember. Well, I suppose I should remember. I suppose I should remember it too, but.
Let's see, 1910.
Yeah, I would have been, yeah.
I never been boys at that time.
He was my brother's buddy all the time, so. Yeah,
Now, the flu, what do you remember about the flu around here?
yeah, there was a lot of it, believe me. A lot of people died. Poor Dr. Van Houten would come to our house with his horses. He didn't get that far.
Yes.
Then he'd get one of my brother's teams to drive to other places, because his horses were wore out going that far. He felt sorry for him.
You didn't have a car in 1918.
No, he went with horses. Yeah, horses and buggy. And he went a lot of places, I tell you, around there. A lot of sick people.
Yeah, Charlotte Van Houten told me she nearly died of flu.
Yeah.
You have the flu?
I don't know if I have or not. I suppose maybe as long as the years I had a little bit of it, but I don't think so. I haven't had much of any trouble, I think, till now. But I got it now. Full force. So, but you gotta have something.
Yeah, now did anybody die of the flu that you remember?
Oh yeah, there was many in the neighborhood that died of the flu. Yeah. Yeah, I
Was it worse in town?
Well, I don't know. I don't know about town, you know. We weren't in town, so I don't know just what happened in town much, but I suppose there was a lot of it here too.
Did they stop going to church for a little while?
Oh yeah, they stopped most everything. Yeah, they did because people just couldn't get around, you know.
But then they were afraid of catching it.
Yeah, they didn't want to get mixed up with it if they didn't have it. So, but I know Van Houten would come to our place always and trade horses.
Is he your family doctor too, or?
He was a family doctor, yeah.
Oh, he's probably the one that delivered you, or?
Remember old Dr. Van?
In 1909, yeah.
This is Charles Chelling.
1909.
All right.
He's from Lisbon.
Well, I suppose I
His
can
father
ask
was
the
a
question again,
mortician.
is what do you remember about the 1918 flu epidemic?
Well, I remember quite a bit about it because it happened. It happened about the same time that the war started, and I had a brother that was an older brother that was ready to go into the, or he was in already in the service. He'd been in the what was at that time the National Guard, you know, and
He was in Company G?
he just graduated from college and he was going into the Army. And it just happened about that time that, now I suppose that must have been in 1918. And it was about that time that they started recruiting people. You know, a lot of people were drafted to go in the service. And I remember that when they brought them in and they lined them up and paraded them up and down to the main street and, you know, to give them a send-off.
You were in Lisbon?
Yes, in Lisbon, you know. And it was into the war. Some of the soldiers that got into the service, they got the flu, and it was particularly bad overseas. And there was one or two of them that were died from the flu before they ever got anywhere. They never got overseas. I think they were died in this country. And then later on, I didn't know this at the time, but he would be my future brother-in-law. My sister would marry him. His name was Martin Ostrom, and he was in college at that time. And he and a lot of other kids like they did at that time were super patriotic, and they went out and enrolled in Mass, you know. And he went overseas almost immediately, and he was in the service where they took care of the influenza cases over there overseas, and they had a lot of people died with it overseas. And he said that he told me about it when he got back that he was in the I don't know what to call it, maybe it was a hospital corps or something. And he was in that, and he went through the service. I don't think that he had the flu himself, but he went all through the service and got home okay. But that was the people that went overseas, but in Lisbon, there was the flu spread real rapidly. And I remember I had a sister that was going to SQ as a freshman, and it broke out during the fall that I remember, and they closed the college and sent her home. And I remember when she came home, she was wearing a mask. They didn't know what the flu was all